They were sitting at my kitchen table, speaking in the careful voices people use around a dying relative. I wasn't dying. I was 73 behind the pantry door, hearing my son say, "Once we get Mom into assisted living, we split her accounts. Half to me, half to Claire. She won't even notice. Hi, dear hearts. Grace here. I'm in my 70s too, and I know that icy feeling when family starts counting your money early. What would you do? Tell me in the comments." The pantry smelled like cinnamon because I'd been proofing a little babka loaf. Through the crack, I saw Claire's trench coat on my chair like it owned the place, and Evan's hand tapping my table. The table I refinished myself after Harold died. Claire said, "We'll need her to sign the power of attorney first. The bank won't speak to us otherwise." "Mom's getting forgetful," Evan answered, almost cheerful. "We're protecting her." Forgetful. I could still list every automatic payment I'd set up for them. Evan's mortgage top-up, Claire's car insurance, my grandson's tuition fund. I didn't forget. I just didn't brag. I breathed in, counted to 5, and walked out with my best hostess smile. "You're early," I said. "Coffee?" They jumped like children caught stealing cookies. Claire slid a thick folder under her purse, so fast the corners bent. "Mom," Evan started, then stopped. "In my own house?" I finished for him, turning on the kettle. Claire recovered first. "We thought you might still be in bed. How are you feeling?" "Like a woman who knows where she keeps her keys," I said, and watched for shame. I got none, only that polished concern people perform when they need something. Evan cleared his throat. "We came to talk about planning, just safeguards. If you ever fall, if there's an emergency, or if you want to move me somewhere," I added, still calm. Claire opened the folder and slid it toward me. "It's simple. You sign, and we can handle your accounts and medical decisions if you're ever not able." Not able, as if I was already a problem to store away. I sat, hands folded. "Read it." Evan blinked. "Mom, read it out loud," I said. "And while you're at it, explain the part where you split my accounts. Because I was in the pantry. I heard you." The kitchen went silent. Even the kettle seemed to hold its breath before it started to hiss. Claire's face tightened. "You were eavesdropping?" she asked, offended, like I was the one who'd crossed a line. "I was breathing," I said, "in my pantry, while my children planned my finances like I'm already in the ground." Evan's cheeks turned red. "That's not what we meant. We're trying to keep you safe from scammers." I nodded slowly. "Then here's your first lesson in safety. Don't assume a woman is helpless just because her hair is gray." Claire tried a new tone, soft, coaxing. "Mom, please. This is standard. Everyone does it. You've always said you didn't want to be a burden." "I'm not a burden," I said. "I'm inconvenient. There's a difference." Evan's patience snapped. "We have families. We can't drop everything for you." "This makes it easier." The words landed heavy because they were finally honest. I stood and turned off the kettle the moment it whistled. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. "You want easier?" I asked. "Here it is. You go home. Today." Claire stared. "Don't be dramatic." "I've been quiet for years," I said. "That's not drama. That's training you to treat me badly." Evan pushed his chair back, hard. "So what now? You're going to punish us?" "No," I said. "I'm going to protect myself. The way I always have." I walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rolled into my warm little house. The babka dough rose patiently on the counter, innocent as ever. Claire grabbed her purse. Evan lingered like he expected me to soften. I didn't. When they finally stepped outside, Evan threw one last line over his shoulder. "We'll talk later." I looked him in the eye. Only if you learn to speak to me like I'm alive. I shut the door, slid the chain, and stood there until my heartbeat slowed. They'd been so flustered that Claire left behind a yellow sticky note on my placemat. 2 names. 2 percentages. A reminder that I wasn't a person in their minds. I was a pie to be sliced. Underneath, in tiny handwriting, was another word that chilled me. Guardianship. I poured myself 1 cup of coffee and didn't drink it. I just stared at that note until the anger stopped being hot and turned into something sharper and cleaner. Strategy. My phone buzzed then. My grandson, Miles. "Are you okay, Nana?" Dad said you sounded confused. I typed back, steady as a metronome. "I'm perfectly clear. Come by tomorrow if you can." I could use a friendly face. Then I went back to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called the number I'd saved and never used. Ruth Halpern, estate attorney. When her assistant answered, I said, "I need an appointment, as soon as possible, and I need it confidential." Ruth Halpern's office smelled faintly of old paper and bergamot tea. I liked that. It didn't feel rushed. It felt deliberate. I wore my navy wool coat and my good brooch, the one shaped like a camellia, because I wanted to look exactly what I was. Competent. Ruth was younger than me by maybe 10 years, sharp eyes behind thin frames. She didn't waste time. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The pantry, the folder, the percentages, the word guardianship. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she folded her hands and asked one question. "Have you signed anything?" "No." "Good." She explained it calmly, like she was describing a recipe. Power of attorney could give them control over my finances. Medical directives could edge them into decisions about where I lived. Guardianship? That was a court declaring me incapable. "Can they just do that?" I asked. "They can try," she said, "but they'd need evidence." I almost laughed. "They're already building it." I showed her the message from Miles. "Dad said you sounded confused." Ruth nodded slowly. "Document everything, from this moment on." I signed papers that day, but not theirs. I revoked any prior informal permissions I'd ever granted. I created a revocable living trust with myself as sole trustee. Successor trustee? Not Evan, not Claire. "Who do you trust?" Ruth asked. I thought about Miles bringing me pistachio gelato last week just because he'd seen it and thought of me. "Miles," I said. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "He's young." "He's honest," I answered. "We updated my will. We added explicit clauses disinheriting anyone who attempted guardianship without medical proof." Ruth called it a no contest clause. I called it a mirror. Before I left, I gave one more instruction. "I don't want them contacted, not unless I authorize it." "You're in control," Ruth said firmly. On the way home, I stopped at my bank. The manager, Thomas, had known Harold and me for 30 years. He still wore cufflinks shaped like tiny anchors. "I'd like to review every authorized user on my accounts," I said. He pulled up the records. Claire had been listed as an emergency contact. Evan had limited viewing access to one account, the one I used to help with his mortgage. "Remove it," I said. Thomas hesitated. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I replied. We added 2-factor authentication to everything. New passwords, new security questions, ones no one could guess. Not my maiden name, not my first dog. I chose the name of the Andalusian village where Harold proposed. No one knew that but me. That evening, my phone started buzzing. "Claire, did you change something at the bank?" "Evan, my transfer didn't go through. What's happening?" "Claire, Mom, this is exactly what we were worried about." I let them wait an hour before replying. "I'm reorganizing my finances." "No need for concern." Evan called immediately. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I simplified," I said. "You cut off my transfer." I paused it. "Mom, my payment's due tomorrow." "You're 46, I said quietly. "Figure it out." Silence. Then, sharp as vinegar. "This is manipulation." I almost admired the audacity. "No," I said. "This is adulthood." Claire tried next, softer. "Mom, if you're feeling overwhelmed, we can come over." "I'm not overwhelmed," I replied. "I'm observant." She exhaled loudly. "You're pushing us away." "I'm stepping back," I corrected. "There's space between those things." After I hung up, I made myself a small bowl of avgolemono soup from the freezer and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where they'd divided me like a ledger. The next morning, Miles came by. He looked uneasy, like he'd walked into a storm he didn't understand. "Nana," he said carefully, "Dad says you're making drastic choices." I studied his face. He had Harold's eyes, clear, steady. "Do I seem confused to you?" I asked. He shook his head immediately. "No." "Good," I said, "because things are about to get uncomfortable." I told him only part of it. Enough so he wouldn't be blindsided. Not enough to burden him. That afternoon, Claire sent a message that changed the temperature completely. "We need to have a serious talk. We're worried about your cognitive decline. If you won't cooperate, we'll have to explore other options." Other options. There it was. Not care, not love. Leverage. I put the phone down, walked to my garden, and pressed my hands into the soil around my hellebore plants. The earth was cool, steady, real. Not like the performance unfolding around me. They thought they could intimidate me into surrender. They had no idea I'd already moved 3 steps ahead. The letter arrived by certified mail 2 days later, thick cream envelope, Claire's return address printed in tidy black ink. I signed for it with a steady hand. Inside was a formal notice. They were concerned about my recent erratic financial behavior and intended to seek a cognitive evaluation. If I refused, they would petition the court for temporary guardianship. Erratic. Because I paused my own money. I set the paper flat on my dining table and smoothed it like fabric. My pulse didn't spike this time. It sharpened. I called Ruth immediately. "They moved faster than I expected," she said, after reading the scanned copy I sent. "But this is still just pressure. Have you seen your primary physician recently?" 6 months ago. "Schedule a full evaluation, voluntarily. We'll get ahead of this." That afternoon, I booked an appointment with Dr. Singh, who had treated me for years and once complimented my memory when I corrected his dosage math. Then I did something else. I printed screenshots of every message Claire and Evan had sent. The percentages, the transfers, the confused comment. I organized them in a slim leather portfolio Harold once used for contracts. I labeled the tabs: intent, access, threat. If they wanted documentation, I would give them documentation. The next escalation came quicker than I thought. Evan showed up unannounced. I was slicing fennel for a salad when he walked straight into my kitchen without knocking. He still had his old key. "You changed the garage code," he said, accusation first, greeting never. "Yes." "You can't just lock us out." "I can," I replied. "It's my house." He paced like a man rehearsing a speech. "Mom, do you understand what you're doing? You're isolating yourself. That's a red flag." "From whom?" I asked. "From us. From family." I wiped my hands slowly. Family doesn't threaten court action when their ATM closes. His jaw tightened. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm clarifying it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If this goes to court, it won't be pretty. Judges don't like elderly people making impulsive decisions. Impulsive? I echoed. I've managed investments since before you could spell dividend. He laughed once, short and humorless. You really think this is about money? I held his gaze. Yes. That was when he slipped. You've always said everything would be divided fairly. Claire and I built our expectations around that. Expectations. There it was again. Not gratitude, not humility, entitlement. I am alive, I said quietly. There is nothing to divide. He ran a hand through his hair. You're being unreasonable. I'm being independent. The word seemed to irritate him more than anything else. He tried one last angle. If you don't cooperate, we'll have no choice. We'll request an emergency evaluation. I've already scheduled one, I said. That stopped him. With Dr. Singh, voluntarily. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. You're overreacting, he muttered. No, I replied. I'm responding. He left without slamming the door, which almost disappointed me. Anger I could handle. Calculation required more care. That evening, Claire called again, voice smooth as polished marble. Mom, we heard you booked a doctor's appointment. Yes. You don't need to prove anything. I agree, I said, but you seem to need proof. She sighed. This could all go away if you'd just sign the POA. It's temporary. Temporary control, I corrected. Permanent consequences. There was a pause, then something colder. If the court appoints someone, you won't get to choose who it is. Ah, so that was the play. You won't win that, I said calmly. You're very confident. I'm very prepared. After we hung up, I walked through my house slowly, touching familiar things. The carved cedar chest, the porcelain teacups from Lisbon, Harold's old brass sextant on the shelf. My life wasn't clutter. It was proof of memory. If they thought they could paint me as confused, they would have to erase decades of competence, and I wasn't going to let them. The next morning, Thomas from the bank called. Evan requested account statements, he said carefully. I told him we couldn't release anything. Thank you, I replied. He sounded upset. I imagine he did. After I hung up, I added another tab to my leather portfolio. Pattern. They were building a case. So was I. And when this went before a judge, it wouldn't be about whether I was forgetful. It would be about whether my children mistook access for ownership. Doctor. Singh's office was bright in that sterile, overconfident way modern clinics try to be. White walls, abstract art that looked like someone spilled optimism across canvas. I wore my plum-colored blazer and carried my leather portfolio like armor. He smiled when I walked in. You look well. I am well, I said. But my children are preparing to suggest otherwise. His expression shifted. Concern, not for me, but for the situation. We went through every test. Memory recall, pattern recognition, date orientation. He asked me to subtract sevens from 100. I did it faster than he expected. He asked me to remember 3 objects, candle, river, violin, and repeat them 20 minutes later. I did. Then I leaned forward. They're building a narrative, I said. I need the truth documented. He nodded slowly. You're cognitively sound. No signs of impairment. Put it in writing. He did. I left with a formal evaluation stating I was fully competent to manage my financial and medical affairs. Clear language, no ambiguity. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. Claire. How did the appointment go? She asked. Voice sweet as honey poured over glass. Excellent, I replied. That's good, because we've scheduled our own consultation. With whom? A specialist, just to be thorough. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You're welcome to spend your money however you like. Silence. She hadn't expected that. That evening, I received an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. They were requesting voluntary cooperation with a capacity review. If I declined, they would advise their clients to proceed with legal options. Their clients. I printed the email and placed it under the tab labeled Pattern. They weren't worried about my health. They were constructing leverage. The following Saturday, they arrived together, not with flowers, not with apologies, with witnesses. Claire brought her friend Marlene, the type who always smells faintly of expensive perfume and disapproval. Evan brought his wife, Lila, who wouldn't meet my eyes. We thought it would help to have support, Claire said as they entered my living room. Support for whom? I asked. Marlene smiled thinly. We're just here to observe. Observe? I almost laughed. They sat around my coffee table like a tribunal. Claire placed a new folder down. Evan crossed his arms. Mom, he began, we're concerned about your recent isolation, financial instability, and hostility. I blinked. Financial instability? You cut off transfers without discussion, Claire said quickly. That's erratic. I adjusted my own accounts, I replied. That's responsible. Marlene chimed in, voice syrupy. Sometimes older adults don't realize when they're acting out of fear. I looked at her calmly. And sometimes outsiders mistake boundaries for fear. Lila shifted uncomfortably. Evan leaned forward. We're offering a solution. If you sign the POA now, we won't need to escalate. There it was again. Not a request. A trade. And if I don't? I asked. Claire's tone hardened. Then we'll petition for guardianship, with documentation. I opened my leather portfolio and placed Dr. Singh's evaluation on the table. Here's mine. The room stilled. Evan picked it up, scanning quickly. His jaw tightened. That's just one doctor. Yes, I said evenly. The one who has treated me for 8 years. Claire looked to Marlene, who suddenly seemed far less confident. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Claire said. No, I corrected. You are. Evan's patience snapped again. You think this is about greed? You think we need your money? I held his gaze without blinking. You're the ones who started calculating percentages. He stood abruptly. You're paranoid. And you're transparent. For a split second, something ugly flashed across his face. Frustration that the plan wasn't unfolding smoothly. Claire gathered her folder with tight movements. If you won't cooperate, we'll see you in court. I nodded once. Then make sure you bring evidence. They left in a flurry of indignation and wounded pride. When the door closed, the house felt quieter than it had in weeks. I didn't feel shaken. I felt focused. Because now it was official. They had drawn the line publicly, and I was ready to meet them there. They filed. Ruth called me at 9 a.m, her voice steady but tight. They've submitted a petition for temporary guardianship. It cites financial instability, paranoia, and alleged cognitive decline. Alleged, I repeated calmly, buttering my toast. They're requesting an expedited hearing. Of course they were. Pressure was their favorite instrument. Do we have time? I asked. Yes, she replied. But we need to move decisively. That afternoon, I sat in Ruth's conference room reviewing documents that felt surreal. My own children had signed affidavits describing me as confused, isolated, and financially reckless. Financially reckless. Because I stopped funding their comfort. Ruth slid another paper toward me. They've included statements claiming you've been forgetting conversations and misplacing large sums. I almost smiled. I misplace patience, not money. We'll counter with your medical evaluation, banking records, and documented messages. Include everything, I said, especially the percentages. Ruth's eyes sharpened. You kept that? I keep everything. Back home, I found another surprise waiting. A locksmith's invoice taped to my mailbox. Evan had tried to claim I'd locked him out of property he had access rights to. The locksmith had refused without my authorization. The audacity would have impressed me if it weren't so insulting. My phone rang minutes later. Claire. You didn't have to embarrass us, she snapped without greeting. I didn't call the locksmith, I replied. You changed codes without notice. Yes. You're proving our point. No, I said evenly. You're proving mine. She exhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? After everything we've done for you? That line almost made me laugh out loud. List it, I said. Silence. What exactly have you done for me that requires repayment in legal control? Her voice dropped. We've supported you. I buried your father, I replied. I paid your tuition. I helped with your mortgages. I funded your children's schools. If this is about debt, I believe we're settled. The quiet that followed was heavy. Then she shifted tactics. If you keep fighting, this will get ugly. Court-appointed evaluations, public records. It won't look good. I'm not afraid of looking competent in public, I answered. After we hung up, I walked to my study and opened the cedar chest where Harold used to keep important papers. Inside were old stock certificates, property deeds, and something else, my original estate draft from years ago. In it, everything had indeed been divided evenly. I stared at the numbers for a long moment. Fairness had always been my instinct, but fairness requires respect. That evening, I called Ruth again. I want to update the trust, I said. In what way? I want explicit language. Anyone who attempts guardianship without medical proof receives nothing, not reduced, nothing. Ruth paused. That's strong. So am I. And beneficiaries? I looked at the window where late sunlight filtered through lace curtains. Miles remains successor trustee, I said. But I'm adding conditions. Funds released for education, first home, or business venture only. Structured distributions. And Evan and Claire? I inhaled slowly. They forfeit. There was silence on the other end, but not judgment. Understood, Ruth said. We worked late drafting revisions. Precise wording, no loopholes, no emotional language, just legal clarity. Before bed, I poured myself a small glass of Amaro and sat on my porch. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. For the first time since I'd overheard them in the pantry, I didn't feel reactive. I felt deliberate. They thought court would scare me into surrender. What it actually did was remove the last thread of hesitation. This was no longer about money. It was about dignity. And I had just decided exactly how much mine was worth. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks of polite tension stretched thin over everything. Claire stopped calling. Evan stopped pretending concern. Instead, there were formal letters, copied attorneys, carefully phrased accusations. And then came the next maneuver. A brochure appeared in my mailbox. Sunny Acres Assisted Living. It had glossy photos of smiling seniors playing bingo under pastel chandeliers. A handwritten note from Claire was clipped to the front. We reserved a room just in case. Reserved just in case. I carried the brochure inside and set it on the counter next to my cast iron skillet. The contrast amused me. They thought I was ready for scheduled pudding cups and supervised walks. That afternoon, Evan showed up again, this time knocking at least. "We need to be practical," he said the moment I opened the door. "If the court sides with us, transitions go smoother when they're prearranged." "Sides with you?" I repeated calmly. "You're talking like this is a custody battle." "It kind of is," he shot back. "I'm not a child." "You're 73. "Yes," I said, "and still capable of reading my own bank statements." He stepped inside without invitation again, scanning the room like he was assessing inventory. His eyes lingered on the cedar chest, the artwork, the silver candlesticks. "You're making this adversarial," he muttered. "You filed first," I replied. He paced slowly. "Mom, listen. If you just cooperate now, we can withdraw the petition." "Withdraw it in writing," I said. "That's not how this works." "It is if you're sincere." His patience thinned. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I've stopped accommodating." He looked at me as if that were the real betrayal. Later that evening, Claire sent a group message, including Miles. "Dad and I are worried about Nana's mental state. She's becoming paranoid and combative. We're doing this out of love." I watched the typing indicator blink as Miles responded. "I've seen Nana twice this week. She's fine." Claire replied instantly. "You're young. You don't understand the signs." I stepped in then. "Remove him from this conversation. This is between adults." Claire's answer was immediate. "Exactly." That one word revealed everything. They didn't see him as an adult. They didn't see me as one either. The next morning, Ruth forwarded me a copy of their supporting affidavits. Claire claimed I had accused her of theft without proof. Evan claimed I was isolating myself and refusing help. They both referenced my sudden financial restructuring as evidence of instability. I read every word carefully. Then I called Thomas at the bank. "I need certified records of every transfer made in the last 5 years," I said. "All of them?" he asked. "Yes." 2 days later, I had a stack nearly an inch thick. Mortgage assistance, insurance payments, tuition contributions, even the emergency dental bill for Claire's son last year. I tabbed those pages carefully. Support. If this was going to court, I would not argue emotionally. I would argue factually. That weekend, something unexpected happened. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, knocked on my door holding a casserole dish of something that smelled richly of saffron and garlic, her famous arroz con pollo. "I heard things," she said gently, "from Claire." "Of course." "And?" I asked. "She said you've been confused lately, that you might be moved." I met her eyes. "Do I seem confused?" She studied me, then shook her head firmly. "You seem angry." "That's accurate." She squeezed my hand. "If anyone asks, I will say what I see." That small gesture steadied me more than she knew. They were trying to paint me as isolated, but isolation requires absence. And I was very much present. 3 days before the hearing, Claire called again, voice stripped of sweetness now. "If you embarrass us in court, don't expect a relationship afterward." I let the silence stretch. "You ended the relationship the day you divided my accounts while I was alive," I said quietly. She inhaled sharply. "So that's it? You're choosing pride over family?" "No," I replied. "I'm choosing self-respect over control." When I hung up, I didn't feel shaky. I felt resolved. They believed court would corner me. What they didn't understand was this. I had already decided that even if I lost the petition, they would never control a single dollar again. The hearing was set for Thursday morning. On Tuesday afternoon, a woman I had never met knocked on my door. She introduced herself as a court-appointed investigator. Neutral, she emphasized. She would assess my living conditions and mental state before the judge made any temporary decision, so they'd pushed hard enough to trigger a review. "Please come in," I said. She stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning everything. Not judgmental, observant. I respected that. She asked routine questions first. Date, president, current events. I answered without hesitation. Then she shifted. "Your children state you've been withdrawing unusually large sums of money." "I've been restructuring my assets," I replied. "Not withdrawing irresponsibly." "Why restructure now?" "Because I overheard them planning to divide my accounts while I'm alive." Her pen paused. "Do you have evidence of that?" I stood, retrieved the leather portfolio, and placed the sticky note with the percentages in front of her. She examined it carefully. "And these?" she asked, flipping through printed messages. "Screenshots. Time-stamped." She read silently for several minutes. "Have they ever taken funds without your permission?" she asked. "Not illegally," I said, "but I've subsidized their lives for years." She nodded slowly. "Do you feel afraid of them?" "No," I said honestly. "I feel disappointed." She walked through my home next, opened cabinets, checked the refrigerator, noted the garden through the back window. She even asked me to describe my weekly routine. "I host a book club on Sundays," I said. "I make a rather competitive pavlova. I manage my investments every Monday morning with coffee." She smiled faintly. "You sound structured." "I am." Before she left, she asked one final question. "If the court denies their petition, what will you do?" I didn't hesitate. "I will continue living exactly as I have, independently." She closed her notebook. "Thank you." After she left, my phone rang. "Evan." "What did you tell her?" he demanded. "The truth. You're escalating this. You filed the petition. You forced us to." I almost admired how seamlessly responsibility shifted in his mind. "No," I said calmly. "You chose this path." His voice dropped, colder than before. "If the judge sides with you, don't expect us to forget." "That's all right," I replied. "I don't expect you to." There was a long silence on the line. Then he said something that finally stripped away the last illusion. "We counted on that money. Not, we worried about you. Not, we were scared. Counted on." I closed my eyes briefly. "You counted on me dying quietly." "That's not fair." "It's accurate." He hung up without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from clarity. The next morning, Ruth called with a new development. "They've added supplemental claims," she said. "Allegations of paranoia. They're emphasizing that you accused them of plotting." "Because they were," I said evenly. "Stay composed in court," she advised. "Let the documentation speak." "I intend to." But something inside me had shifted. If they were willing to publicly declare me incompetent for access to my assets, then reconciliation was no longer on the table. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. And Thursday would determine whether it succeeded. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just fluorescent lights, polished wood, and people pretending this was routine. This is the moment, dear hearts. A courtroom can feel colder than any winter. Imagine standing there while your own children question your sanity. What would you do in her place? Tell me below. Evan and Claire sat together at the petitioner's table. Coordinated, composed. Claire wore pearl earrings I'd given her for her 40th birthday. I noticed that. Ruth leaned toward me. "Stay calm. Answer directly. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, began reviewing the petition aloud. Words like cognitive decline, erratic behavior, financial mismanagement floated through the room like accusations carved in ice. Then it was my turn. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, "your children allege that you have been acting irrationally with your finances. How do you respond?" I stood slowly, not rushed, not theatrical. I restructured my accounts after overhearing my children planning to divide them while I am still alive. A faint ripple moved through the room. The judge looked at Evan. "Did that conversation occur?" Evan shifted. "It was taken out of context." "Context?" I repeated calmly. "There were percentages written down." Ruth handed the sticky note to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge examined it carefully. Claire leaned forward. "Your Honor, she's fixating on one misunderstanding. Her behavior since then has been combative and secretive." "I secured my assets," I said. "That is not combat." The judge turned to the court investigator. "Your findings?" The investigator stood. "Mrs. Whitmore is cognitively intact, organized, fully aware of her financial decisions. I found no evidence of impairment." The air shifted. Evan's lawyer attempted one more angle. "Even if she is currently competent, her isolation suggests vulnerability." I spoke before Ruth needed to. "I host weekly gatherings. I manage my own investments. I scheduled my own medical evaluation voluntarily. I am not isolated. I am selective." A faint murmur ran through the benches. The judge leaned back, studying me carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe your children are acting in good faith?" The question hung heavy. I chose my words deliberately. "I believe they are acting in their own interest." Silence. The judge looked down at the paperwork, then back up. "Based on the medical evaluation, investigators' report, and absence of credible evidence of incapacity, the petition for temporary guardianship is denied." The word landed like a gavel inside my chest. Denied. Claire's face went pale. Evan's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack, but the judge wasn't finished. "I caution the petitioners," she added firmly, "that guardianship is a serious legal action, not a tool for family disputes over finances." That line hit harder than the denial. The hearing adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Evan grabbed my arm. "You just humiliated us," he hissed. I gently removed his hand from my sleeve. "No," I said. "You did that yourselves." Claire's composure finally fractured. "You've made this permanent," she whispered. "Yes," I replied quietly. "You did." Ruth touched my shoulder. "We should go." As we walked down the courthouse steps, sunlight hit my face. It felt almost surreal after the artificial glare inside. Ruth spoke softly. "They could appeal, but it's unlikely to succeed." "I don't think they will," I said. "Why?" "Because this was never about legal principle. It was about leverage, and they had just lost it publicly." But something in Evan's expression as we parted told me this wasn't over. They had lost control in court, which meant they would try something else. They didn't appeal. Instead, they escalated quietly. 3 days after the hearing, I received 3 separate calls from 2 distant cousins and 1 woman I barely remembered from church. Each conversation followed the same pattern. "We heard you've been struggling. Claire said you're not yourself. Is it true you're pushing everyone away?" It was coordinated. Not a legal attack this time, a reputational one. That afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez knocked again, eyes sharp. "Claire was here," she said. I felt my spine straighten. "Here?" She asked if I'd noticed memory issues. She implied you might need supervision. Supervision? In my own garden. What did you say? I asked. I told her you beat me at chess last week. I almost smiled. Thank you. By evening, the narrative was clear. If they couldn't win in court, they would win socially. Paint me as unstable. Isolate me through whispers. So I did something they didn't expect. I hosted dinner. Not small, not quiet. I invited my book club, 2 neighbors, Dr. Singh, even Thomas from the bank. 12 people in total. I made osso buco with gremolata and served it with saffron risotto. I set the table with my best porcelain and lit every candle I owned. When everyone arrived, the house was warm with conversation. Halfway through dessert, my lemon tart with bruleed sugar crust, I stood. I'd like to address something, I said calmly. The room quieted. There have been concerns shared about my mental state. A few glances exchanged. I recently underwent a court evaluation. I was found fully competent. If anyone has doubts, I encourage you to ask me directly. Silence. Then doctor. Singh cleared his throat. I can confirm Mrs. Whitmore is cognitively intact. Thomas nodded. And financially meticulous. Mrs. Alvarez added, and sharper than most of us. Laughter rippled through the room, not mocking, supportive. I felt something settle inside me. They were trying to isolate me through rumor, so I made the truth public. The next morning, Claire texted, "Why are you turning people against us?" I stared at the message. I hadn't mentioned them by name. I simply stated facts. I responded, "I'm not turning anyone. I'm correcting misinformation." Evan called shortly after. "You're making us look greedy." "You did that in court," I replied. His voice dropped lower than I'd ever heard it. "You think this is over?" "I think the legal part is." He exhaled slowly. "You changed beneficiaries, didn't you?" There it was. The question they'd been circling since the pantry. "I adjusted my estate plan," I said. "To what?" "That's private." A sharp pause. "Mom," he said carefully, "don't make a permanent decision out of anger." I almost admired the strategy, positioning himself as the reasonable one. "This wasn't anger," I said. "This was clarity." He didn't respond immediately. Then, "You owe us fairness." Fairness. I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where percentages had been written before I was considered dead. "Fairness requires good faith," I replied. "You forfeited yours." He hung up without goodbye. That evening, I sat at my desk and reviewed the trust documents again. Everything was airtight. Assets transferred, beneficiaries updated, conditions clear. They could not access it. They could not contest it successfully without triggering the no contest clause. And they didn't yet know the full extent of what I had done. But they suspected, which meant the next move would not be subtle. It would be desperate. And desperation makes people careless. They chose public humiliation. Claire organized a family brunch the following Sunday and invited extended relatives, people I hadn't seen in years. She texted me the details as if nothing had happened. "We'd love for you to come. It's important for everyone to reconnect." Reconnect. I almost declined. Then I reconsidered. If they were staging something, I preferred to see it unfold firsthand. The brunch was at Claire's house. White marble counters, oversized windows, everything curated to look effortless. A mimosa bar glittered on the kitchen island like a performance. When I walked in, conversation dipped just slightly. Not silence, just awareness. Claire kissed my cheek too brightly. "Mom, I'm so glad you came." Evan hovered nearby, watchful. Plates were filled. Polite chatter resumed. I noticed how often eyes drifted toward me. 10 minutes in, Claire tapped her glass lightly. I just want to say, she began, how grateful we all are for family, especially during difficult transitions. There it was. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. Evan stepped in. Mom has been going through changes. We're doing our best to support her. Support? I set my fork down carefully. What changes? I asked evenly. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just some recent decisions that surprised us. Such as? I prompted. Evans sighed theatrically, restructuring her finances, cutting off communication, refusing help. The narrative was smooth, rehearsed. I looked around the room, faces I'd held as babies, attended weddings for, sent holiday cards to. Would anyone here like specifics? I asked calmly. Silence. Claire tried to interrupt. Mom, this isn't the place. Oh, I think it is, I said. I reached into my handbag and removed a single folded copy of the court's denial order. Not the entire portfolio, just the final page. I was evaluated, I said clearly, by my physician and a court investigator, found fully competent. The guardianship petition was denied. A few audible murmurs. Evan's face tightened. They misunderstood the situation, Claire said quickly. No, I replied. They understood it exactly. I let the next sentence land slowly. I overheard my children planning to divide my money while I am still alive. There it was. No embellishment. Just fact. Aunt Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Cousin Daniel stared at Evan. Claire's composure cracked for half a second. That's a distortion. I met her eyes. Percentages were written down. Evan's voice sharpened. You're making us look like vultures. I tilted my head slightly. Then perhaps don't circle. The room went still. This wasn't shouting. It was exposure. Claire tried one last maneuver. Mom changed her estate plan drastically after that misunderstanding. We're just worried she's acting out of spite. There it was. The admission. I didn't deny it. I adjusted my estate plan, I said calmly. As is my legal right. To what? Evan demanded. I held his gaze for a long moment. To reflect reality. The ambiguity unsettled him more than any accusation. Brunch dissolved shortly after. Conversations fractured into whispers. Several relatives approached me quietly to express support. Not loud declarations, just subtle alignment. When I left, Claire followed me outside. You didn't have to ambush us, she hissed. You invited an audience, I replied. I simply spoke. Evan joined her, jaw rigid. You're poisoning the family. No, I said softly. Truth tends to taste bitter. As I drove home, I felt neither triumph nor sadness, just certainty. They had tried court. They had tried rumors. Now they had tried public narrative control. Each time, the pattern was the same. Access first, concern second, reputation management third, which meant the next step would not be social. It would be personal and far less polite. It happened on a Tuesday. Quiet, ordinary. I was in the middle of reorganizing my spice drawer, paprika, sumac, star anise, when I heard the unmistakable click of my front door unlocking. Not knocking, unlocking. My heart didn't race. It sharpened. Evan stepped inside like he still owned access to my life. Behind him was Claire. You changed the garage code, he said, irritated. But you forgot about the old side door key. I didn't correct him. I didn't forget. I said evenly. I was waiting. Claire scanned the room like an auditor. We need to talk. Privately. You're in my house, I replied. It doesn't get more private. Evan held up a folded document. What's that? I asked. A mediation proposal, he said. Before this goes further. Further, I repeated. Claire stepped forward. We know you changed the trust. We spoke to someone. Interesting. You spoke to someone, I echoed calmly. There are ways to challenge drastic amendments made under emotional distress, she said carefully. Emotional distress. I leaned back against the counter. You lost in court. You lost in public opinion. Now you're hoping I doubt myself. Evan's voice lowered. Mom, be reasonable. If you cut us out completely, it will destroy what's left of this family. You already tried to declare me incompetent, I said. That destroyed it. He unfolded the paper and slid it across my dining table. A proposed settlement. They would withdraw all future disputes in exchange for a guaranteed percentage of my estate. Locked in now, legally binding. There it was. Not apology, not remorse, a negotiation. You're bargaining over my death, I said quietly. Claire's composure slipped. We're protecting what's fair. Fair? I asked softly. Or expected? Evan's patience snapped. You're punishing us because you got your feelings hurt. That word again. Feelings. I'm protecting myself because you revealed your intentions, I replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you die tomorrow without clarity, this will be chaos. Legal fees, delays, strain on Miles. There it was. Leverage through my grandson. I've already structured everything to avoid that, I said calmly. Claire froze. What does that mean? It means you're not in control of the timing anymore. For the first time, I saw it. Fear. Not of losing me, of losing access. Evan tried one final tactic. If you walk away from this negotiation, we will contest everything after you're gone. I held his gaze steadily. If you contest, you trigger the no contest clause. You get nothing. Silence. Claire's face drained of color. You wouldn't. I did. The weight of that truth settled heavily between us. They hadn't known. They suspected changes, but not the extent. Evan looked at the mediation proposal, then back at me. His confidence faltered. You've turned into someone I don't recognize, he said. I thought about that. No, I replied. You're seeing me clearly for the first time. Claire gathered the papers with stiff movements. This isn't over. Yes, I said quietly. It is. They stood there for a long moment, perhaps expecting hesitation, regret, softness. They got none. When they finally left, I locked the door behind them and immediately called a locksmith. Not tomorrow, not next week. That afternoon. By sunset, every lock in my house had been replaced, not out of paranoia, out of completion. They had tried intimidation, they had tried negotiation, they had tried pressure through family, court, reputation, and guilt. Now they knew the truth. There was no percentage waiting for them, only consequences, and I was done reacting. From this point forward, I would be deciding the terms. I thought they were finished. I was wrong. The envelope arrived by courier this time. Thick, formal, aggressive in tone before I even opened it. A notice of intent to contest my estate plan. Not after my death. Now. Ruth called within the hour. They're attempting to argue undue influence and emotional retaliation, she said evenly. They're claiming your recent amendments were punitive and made under psychological strain. I almost admired the creativity. Can they freeze anything? I asked. No, she replied. Your assets are in trust, but they're trying to create pressure. Pressure again. They're also requesting a temporary injunction to review the trust's terms. I let that settle. They're fishing, I said. Yes. That afternoon, I walked into Ruth's office with something new in my posture. Calm had become resolve. What do you need from me? I asked. Documentation of capacity at the time of amendment, evidence of long-standing financial competence, and proof that this wasn't impulsive. I handed her a folder. Inside were investment summaries spanning 15 years, tax returns organized in neat chronological order, emails from financial advisors praising my precision. I didn't amend overnight, I said. I planned. She reviewed everything quietly. This is strong, she admitted. 2 days later, we were back in court. Not for guardianship. For their motion to inspect and challenge. This is the second battlefield, dear friends. Not about sanity this time, but about motive. When family says you're acting out of spite, what would you do? Would you soften or stand firm? Tell me below. The judge was the same. That worked in my favor. Evan's attorney argued first. The respondent made drastic changes to her estate plan immediately after a family disagreement. This indicates retaliatory behavior rather than rational planning. Retaliatory. Such a clinical word for betrayal. Ruth stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore updated her estate plan after discovering explicit evidence that her children were planning financial division during her lifetime. She sought medical evaluation voluntarily, restructured assets under legal guidance, and implemented a no-contest clause to prevent further litigation. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Whitmore, were these changes made out of anger? I considered the question carefully. Initially, I was angry, I admitted. But I did not act while angry. I acted after documentation, consultation, and reflection. Why disinherit entirely? The judge asked. I met her eyes. Because trust, once broken at that level, cannot be legally repaired. The courtroom went quiet. Evan's lawyer attempted one more angle. Total disinheritance of immediate heirs is extreme. So is filing guardianship against a competent parent, Ruth replied smoothly. The judge reviewed the submitted evidence, the medical report, financial records, documented communications. After a long pause, she spoke. The court finds no evidence of undue influence or incapacity at the time of amendment. The trust remains valid. Motion denied. Denied. Again. This time, Evan didn't speak. Claire didn't glare. They looked smaller. Outside the courthouse, Claire finally said it. You're really going to leave us nothing. I studied her face. No longer angry, just exposed. I'm leaving you exactly what you invested in this relationship, I said quietly. She swallowed. That's cruel. No, I replied. It's accurate. Evan shook his head. You'll regret this. I didn't answer, because regret requires doubt. And I had none. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, grilled sea bass with capers and a small arugula salad. I ate slowly, deliberately. The legal challenges were exhausted. They had tried to declare me incompetent. They had tried to paint me vindictive. They had tried to pry open the trust. All denied. What they didn't yet know was where the money was actually going. And when they found out, it would end whatever illusion of reconciliation still lingered. They came back on a Thursday evening. No lawyers, no folders. Just the two of them standing on my porch like children who'd lost something and weren't sure how to ask for it back. I let them wait a full 30 seconds before unlocking it. Claire spoke first. We're not here to fight. That's new, I said calmly. Evan looked tired. Not defeated, calculating less perhaps, but still measuring outcomes. "We want to understand," he said. "Understand what?" "What you've done," Claire replied quietly. I stepped aside and let them in. We sat at the same dining table where this began. No coffee this time. No pretense. "You tried to take control of my life," I said plainly. "Twice." Evan flinched. "We thought you were spiraling. You thought I was inconvenient." Claire's composure cracked. "We panicked. You cut off support without warning." "There was warning," I said. "You just didn't expect consequences." Evan leaned forward. "Fine. We handled it badly. But cutting us out completely? That's permanent." "Yes," I said. Silence settled heavily. Claire swallowed. "Where is it going?" There it was. The real question. Not how are you? Not can we repair this? Where is it going? I studied them carefully before answering. "A protected trust," I said. "Structured distributions, education, first home, business capital." Evan's brow furrowed. "For Miles." "Yes." Claire's voice sharpened slightly. "Only him?" "Primarily." The word hit them harder than yes would have. "And the rest?" Evan pressed. I didn't hesitate. "A portion to the Whitmore Community Legal Fund." They stared. "It supports seniors facing financial exploitation," I continued calmly. "Legal fees, representation." Claire blinked. "You're giving our inheritance to strangers?" "I'm giving it to people who need protection," I corrected. Evan's jaw tightened. "To make a point." "No," I said quietly. "To make impact." Silence. Claire's eyes filled, not with tears but with frustration. "You're choosing outsiders over your own children." "I'm choosing alignment," I replied. "With what?" Evan demanded. "With values." That word seemed to irritate him more than money. "You're punishing us," he said again, but the certainty was gone. I leaned back slowly. "When you filed guardianship, you told a court I wasn't capable of running my own life. That doesn't vanish because you feel uncomfortable now." Claire's voice softened slightly. "If we apologize?" I held her gaze. "Are you apologizing because you're sorry?" I asked, "or because the numbers changed?" Silence answered for her. Evan stood first. "So that's it," he said quietly. "We get nothing." "You get your independence," I replied. "The same one you tried to take from me." Claire lingered a moment longer. "You've changed everything," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You did." They left without slamming the door this time. No threats, no ultimatums, just the heavy understanding that the leverage was gone. And with it, any illusion that money would smooth over what they had revealed. The silence afterward was different. Not tense. Not watchful. Final. Weeks passed without calls. No legal notices. No strategic texts. Even the indirect whispers stopped. It was as if, once the numbers became unreachable, the urgency dissolved. Then the letter came. Handwritten. From Claire. Not typed. Not curated, just ink on paper. She didn't apologize for filing guardianship. She didn't admit to planning percentages. Instead, she wrote about fear, about instability in her marriage, about financial pressure she hadn't disclosed, about how she had assumed, wrongly, that my estate was inevitable support. Assumed. That word again. Evan didn't write. He appeared instead. Alone. He stood on the porch without knocking for a long moment before finally ringing the bell. I opened the door. He looked older, not physically, heavier. "I'm not here about the money," he said immediately. I didn't respond. I waited. "I handled it wrong," he continued. "All of it. I thought if we secured things early, it would prevent chaos later." "By declaring me incompetent?" I asked quietly. He winced. "I thought you were reacting emotionally." "I was," I said. "At first." "And now?" "Now I'm acting intentionally." He nodded slowly. "I know you won't change it," he said. "No." Another long silence. "I don't agree with what you did," he admitted. "But I understand why you did it." That was closer to honesty than anything he'd said before. "You wanted certainty," I replied. "You just tried to extract it from the wrong place." He exhaled, almost a surrender. "Claire's furious," he added. "She says you've destroyed the family." "I didn't file guardianship," I said. He nodded again. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "Good," I answered. That startled him, because forgiveness isn't the same as restoration. We stood there in the doorway, neither stepping fully forward nor retreating. "I don't want to fight anymore," he said. "Then don't," I replied. He looked past me into the house, the same walls, same furniture, same woman. Only now he saw boundaries where access used to be. "I'll tell Claire to stop," he said. "You don't control her," I answered gently. "And she doesn't control me." He gave a faint, tired smile at that. Before he left, he asked one final question. "Is there anything left for us?" I considered it carefully. "Yes," I said. "What?" "The relationship you choose to build without leverage." He didn't answer. He just nodded and walked down the steps. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the trust one final time. Everything was executed. Assets secured. Beneficiaries confirmed. Nothing could be undone without my consent, and I had none to give. But something had shifted. Not in the documents. In me. The anger that once burned hot had cooled into something steadier. Not regret. Not triumph. Just clarity. The money was no longer the center of this story. It had become a filter, and everyone had revealed themselves through it. Winter came quietly that year. Not dramatic storms. Just a steady cooling of air, the kind that makes you reach for wool without thinking. My house felt different too, not emptier, just quieter, in a way that didn't ache. Miles came by most Sundays now, not because of money, because he wanted to. We argued about books, debated politics, and once attempted to make saffron biscotti that turned into something closer to edible gravel. We laughed anyway. Claire kept her distance. Brief messages on holidays, carefully neutral. Evan called occasionally, not to negotiate, not to test boundaries, but to ask about ordinary things. The conversations were cautious, real in a way they hadn't been before. No one mentioned the trust. No one mentioned percentages. The legal battles faded into paperwork filed away in cedar and dust. One afternoon, I attended the first board meeting of the Whitmore Community Legal Fund. We approved grants for 3 seniors fighting financial exploitation cases. One woman had been pressured into signing over property to her nephew. Another nearly lost her savings through coercion masked as care. I listened quietly as their cases were described. It felt right, not vindictive, not theatrical, aligned. Months later, Claire sent a short message. "I don't agree with what you did, but I understand why you did it." It wasn't warmth. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement. Evan visited once more before the year ended. We sat on the porch with tea. I used to think inheritance was security, he admitted. It isn't, I replied. It's residue. He nodded slowly. You're not afraid of dying alone? He asked suddenly. I smiled faintly. I was more afraid of living without dignity. He didn't argue. That was new. The truth is, I didn't win something glamorous. I didn't reclaim love. I didn't repair what broke. What I did was simpler. I drew a line, and I kept it. Dear hearts, sometimes strength looks cold from the outside. I'm not saying she was right or wrong, but when someone decides your worth while you're still breathing, you have every right to decide your response. Share your thoughts below, and if you believe dignity has no expiration date, like and subscribe.